Hi everyone. So for those of you who have been to my blog before, you have noticed that I generally blog about user-defined actions and Nintex workflow and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Other stuff around workflow and forms and all sorts of goodies. But generally, I kind of focus on user-defined actions. And that's because I find, first of all, they're underutilized, right? And it's really easy to share those out. So for me to be able to build a little bit of workflow logic, share it in a user-defined action to you guys, you'll be able to download it, import it, and publish it in your environment, and you simply drag and drop a single action onto your workflow and you can use it. I generally don't do a whole bunch of like full-on workflows. And usually it's because if I do that, it just makes it that much harder for you to be able to take that logic and put it into your own workflow. So what I'm going to do now is actually talk about a particular workflow I built out after I had a request from a customer around how to do something like this. Now, the only reason I'm not doing this in a user-defined action is because there's really no simple way of doing it. It kind of has to be done in a workflow. You can definitely make it a little bit more generic and dump it into a UDA, but I just found it easier for me to just build it out in a workflow and show you guys. You can feel free to go down to the download section at the bottom of this blog post and download it and play around with it. Make it a little bit more generic that suits your scenario, and then you can reuse it in a bunch of workflows. So what this is actually called the reverse parse repeating section workflow. A repeating section in Nintex forms is just a bunch of XML with a number of repeating rows. So what I've done here is actually just dummied up a bunch of XML to make it look like repeating sections. Let's open this up. Now, in a Nintex form, when it's actually saved, it goes into a hidden field called NF form data. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, and if you have repeating sections in your form, you'll also find that there are these encoded sections of XML. Now, when you decode them, they kind of look like this, right? You'll see it says repeated data, so that's for a repeating section. In this example that I used, I actually had no name for the repeating section, so it just says repeated data. And then each of the rows in the repeating section is in this item called, or in this node called items. So each one of them will have this item node in there. Inside that, I named all my fields or controls of my form. So I had some text, some date time fields as well. So you see I have first name, start date, current time, dimension end, last name, and dimension start. And you'll see I actually have 3 of them in this particular chunk of XML. There's one there, and one there. Okay, now the scenario here is that as people are filling in their rows of data, and it creates this XML, when they finally submit it, I want a workflow to read this repeating section, and instead of going through each of these items from top down, right, which is usually what normal logic is, I actually want to go from the bottom up. All right, so you'll see, just to look at some of these dates, I have the 16th of February, the 19th of February, and the 14th of February. So if I'm going to be reading this information, and in my example, I'll probably be logging it to the workflow history, I want to see it the other way around. I want to see the 14th of Feb, 19th of Feb, then the 16th of Feb. All right, so this dummy XML here. My next action here is the query XML action. Now there's my XML, and you'll see I am getting all those values, first name, last name, start date, current time, all those, and I'm storing each of them in collection variables, right? So if I was to jump in here, probably have a bunch of variables in here, but you'll see text XML is my original XML, and then I have 6 collection variables. Okay, jump out of there. Now we want to do is figure out how many do we have, how many items do we have in these collections, because each of those collection variables will have the same number of items. And in our example of the XML, it'd be 3. So we have a collection operation. We're doing a count just on one of those collections. In this case, we're doing first name, and we're going to store the result in a number variable called num opposite index. Okay, done. Now, this is an interesting one. The math operation action, all we're doing is subtracting 1 from num opposite index. So even though we have 3 items, we're going to drop that down by 1. So we're actually going to look at 2, right? 2 is going to be in this value. Now the reason we're doing this, and I'll show this in a moment, is because when you use indexes into collections, they start with 0, right? So position 1 is actually 0. Position 2 is 1. It's a little confusing for those who haven't done this before, but that's so we basically start off counting from 0 instead of counting from 1, which is what everybody's used to. Okay, so this drops down to 2 now. Now we have a for each action. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through one of those collections, and you'll see there's a collection first name, and I'm going to store the result in text first name. Now, here's the thing. We actually don't need to do this, right? We don't really need to store any value in this variable, but you'll notice the little red asterisk means I have to put something in this field in selection. So that's the only reason. So don't worry about what this is actually doing. I'll tell you why we have a for each in a moment. Okay, now inside the for each we have a run parallel action, so we have 6 branches, 1 branch for each of the collection variables. And you'll see I've actually labeled all these. So here we're getting the first name, the last name, start date, and current, all that sort of stuff. Now notice something when I open these up. I'm looking at the collection of first names. I'm doing a get. The index I'm starting at is this num opposite index, which right now is 2, being the last value, the last index in our collections. Okay, so rather than starting from the beginning, we're actually starting from the end. And now we are storing the value in this text first name, right? Which is why I said in the for each, don't worry about what this is doing. We just need one of those collections to be able to go through them. And we're doing the same thing for all the different fields. Okay. Now we're just going to check if the text body is empty or not. Right. Now what text body is, just to let you guys know, is I'm actually putting together a bunch of HTML. Right? So you'll actually see, or so not HTML, just a bunch of text. So you'll see if the text body variable is empty, what we're doing here is we're actually just storing all the data that we pulled out in these 3 lines, and we're storing it in text body. If text body is not empty, right, which means we're up to like the second item in our iteration, you'll see we actually put the text body up here, and we're appending the rest at the end. And the reason I split this up is because if I just use this, we originally start with text body and it's empty, and I'll end up having a blank line. I didn't want to waste, do that sort of stuff. So I like to be a little bit neat, but it adds a little bit of workflow design. Okay, now we get to the bottom of our for each, and you'll notice we subtract 1 from num opposite index. Now it's going to go from 2 to 1, and we're going to go through the for each again, and now we're going to get the next value in all those collections. So you notice how instead of actually going from the beginning, we're going from the end. So you're probably wondering, why am I doing this instead of maybe using a loop and just counting down, right? Having a loop action and just loop while my index is greater than or equal to 0 or something, and just have one math operation and then not worry about all that other stuff. That's because when you use a loop, if you're using a production environment, most likely you have safe looping turned on, right? Safe looping being that hidden delay within each iteration of a loop, right? So it's going to add a bunch of delay through each iteration. If you're using a for each, you don't have to do that. So this is kind of like a tricky way of getting around the safe looping part. Now that was it, right? We've basically gone through and iterated through these collections, but in reverse order, right? It all starts with figuring out how many items we have in our collections, subtracting 1 from that count, and then going through a for each, getting all those values, and at the end, keep subtracting 1, and you'll go through each one of those, but in reverse or backward order. And finally, I just have a send notification action that actually goes and sends the body in an email. So very easy to do. I'm going to share this out, and just to sort of add to this, the reason why I did not make this into a user-defined action is because when I go to this query XML, these are looking for specific fields in my repeating section. Your repeating sections are going to be different. You may have one field, you may have 20 fields in a repeating section. You're probably going to have different names. So it didn't make sense for me to really wrap all this up into a user-defined action. The same if I come down here, I have 6 fields in each of my items. You could have 1, you could have 20, you could have 50. I don't know how many fields you have in your repeating section. And again, it would not make any sense for me to wrap all this up into user-defined action. So really, this video and this blog post is really about a concept, an idea that you guys can go away with if this is something that you guys need to do. So hopefully you learned something from this. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to add it to the comment section at the bottom of this post. Thanks for watching.